And I remember sitting in the dorms, like before racing for Canadian Henley and watching the women's 8 win in Rio. And I was like, I want to do that. And I was so far away from being there, but like seeing them and like getting to watch the national team after that year and sort of being aware that it existed, I was like, oh, this is something that I want. By the time I was a junior in college, I was physically the fastest person on the team. I wouldn't say I was the best. I had so much to learn, but I had the fastest 2K and 6K. And so I applied for U23 camp for the summer after my junior year. I knew beforehand that I was going to be cut. I don't think the coaches there knew that, but I was like, I know that Columbia is not that good a team, that I'm not that good, but I want to go see what actual good college rowers are like. And that was such a formative experience to be like, okay, I'm not like I'm not as good as them yet. I was cut. But I was like, I can envision myself there.
All right, well, we're already recording, so we might as well jump in. And for everyone listening, we have Charlotte Buck here, who is a two-time Olympian, 2020, 2024, fresh off the Paris Olympics last year. And she is actually literally coming to us from practice, only a few hours ago, currently in Sarasota, where I'll let her explain kind of the timeline coming up as a someone who's coming off of the Olympics and sounds like, getting right back on the horse and kind of getting right back into competitive training, which is quite amazing. And Charlotte, I'm super pumped to chat with you. I'm super pumped to learn about your background as an athlete, your walk-on experience as a college rower, which I love. Everyone knows who's ever listened to this, I love diving into as someone else who was a walk-on. But with that, my first kind of, let's start with just tell us a little bit about where you are now, where you're sitting, right? You're sounds like you're in the hotel in Sarasota. You just came off of practice. Selection stuff starts tomorrow. Like, give people a little bit of just an understanding of what does life look like for someone who rode, in the Olympics, however many months ago, to now getting back into, the seat and trying to go all out competitive efforts and back in the full grind. Like, describe that, and then we'll dive into a little bit about your background and how you got into rowing.
Yeah, we're fully back in the swing of things. So, like you said, I'm at selection camp in Florida. This is our first camp of the year for the senior team, and this camp will decide who goes to World Cup 1 and 2. So this year it's in Lucerne and Varese. We are doing a bunch of different pair matrices. We're in some fours. We're looking to select just whatever is going to be our fastest boats. Year to year, we do selection differently, and so the coaches have decided this year we don't have a set number of athletes that are being sent for the men or women. So who knows? Maybe only 2 people are going to be sent. Maybe the whole squad will be sent. It'll be based on our percentages during pieces that they want to make sure that they have the most competitive boats that can go to the World Cups. The people that are here were selected based on their historical performance. So certainly coming off the Olympics for myself helps a lot. They take that a lot into consideration. Have you made the team before? Our ergs this year. And then the biggest thing is winter speed orders. That went down also in Sarasota, but 2 months ago at this point. So basically all the A finalists were invited. I actually raced the single for that event. Just we had unequal sweep numbers, and I used to train the single, so it was fun to just like get back in that. And I think the single is like a great way to adjust back to training because I did take the fall totally off. I was working my day job full time, living in New York City. Being away from Princeton, New Jersey, which is my usual training hub.
What is that like? So you wrapped up the Olympics in August. This was your second go around, right? Having been there before. Was there like, again, to kind of, I haven't, learned too much about like kind of that post Olympics and all that, but like, was there any bit of you at the end of at the end of Paris where it was like, hey, you know what, I'm going to take like a year off? Or was it like more, hey, you know what, like I'm going to get right back into the grind come whenever you've kind of, I know there's some training prior to this, right? Prior to right now here in May. Was it like, as soon as it ended, I'm going to take the fall off, I'm going to get right back into it? Or was there a part of you where I was like, you know what, maybe I'm going to take a little bit more time off, knowing that LA 2028 is what I would assume is kind of a primary goal. Mm-hmm. I got 4 years to kind of prepare for that. But like, again, like a little bit of a broad question, but what was that mindset in those, in the fall of this year in terms of getting back into what is now full steam ahead?
I think the interesting thing is everybody on the team would have a different answer for you. Personally, I sort of knew going into the Olympics that even if we'd won, even if we'd been on the podium, I wanted to do one more cycle. Um, and I did have the benefit of going through coming off the Tokyo cycle as a sort of, I knew how it went that fall. And so that was sort of my plan the entire time, to shake the fall off. I think this is my message actually to like all athletes. I think you need to take time off. And particularly being an elite athlete, the emotional intensity and the physical intensity going through something like the Olympics, you really should step away for a second and sort of look at your life without your sport and also just like take a break and sleep in some days instead of having to get up at 6 a.m. every day. So that was sort of always my plan. I was really fortunate. I work for Broadridge. I'm one of the 9 athletes on the team that works for them. And so they were happy to have me be full time and be partially in the city. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from like north of New York City. So I was like, oh, I would love to be back in the city. And I got a sublet in the East Village and got to hang out with all my friends who are not involved with rowing. So that was like super important to me to have that moment away. But also like I was in a location where I could still work out when running from my apartment. I'm a New York Athletic Club athlete, so I could go to the gym there on Central Park South, work out. It was difficult for me to actually row. I used to train full time out of the Pelham Boathouse for New York Athletic Club, but living in the city itself and training there is kind of rough. So I actually only rowed twice this fall before I came back. But that was sort of always the plan, like maintain my fitness in other ways, enjoy moving my body, but not really be on the erg that much. And then sort of heading into about December, I ramped up erging and the time that I was back into rowing. And by the time about January 1st, I was back into like 15-hour weeks and then basically didn't hit 25-hour weeks until I entered the first camp in Florida. So maybe I should have done more before that, but like I said, so after Tokyo, I sort of the same thing. I took the fall off. I actually went back to my alma mater, Columbia, and I was one of their assistant coaches for that fall. And I felt like 3 to 4 months was the exact right amount of time off from rowing when you're at this level. Like it was long enough for me to miss it, but also long enough for me to like really get involved in other parts of my life and have a nice time and a break.
And I'm super fascinated by it. What is again, like, just when you think about, because I think this is helpful for any athlete out there who's coming off of, a very, very competitive period of their life and, needs to take a step back. And I think, it's probably okay, like you're taking a step back from rowing specific stuff, but as someone who's very, always thinking about like, hey, how do people stay active and stay fit and things like that. What does that look like if you are taking a step away from rowing specific kind of fitness, like you said, only rowing twice, taking a kind of a necessary step away from the erg, but you have a goal in mind of, kind of being back where you are sitting here today. So obviously you're probably not going full tilt. Hey, I'm going to do Netflix on the couch and just, kind of stay at home all day. Like there's probably some kind of, you're staying active. What does that look like? How do you formulate, kind of like, keeping or maintaining fitness to a degree when you are taking a very deliberate step away from your primary sport?
I did do a lot of running because that is quite an efficient way to stay in shape. And hilariously, I think other people would find this ridiculous, but our fun activity for most of the team was we did a half marathon sort of like in October. And I think other people would be like, that's a ridiculous weekend activity. But like 8 of us just got together in upstate New York and ran the Corning half marathon and had so much fun. So we did sort of other things like that. But I think it's a balance because I think when you're in training, your life is so regimented around your training schedule. And I kind of let it be a little flexible. Like if I had to work longer hours or friends of mine wanted to get dinner, I only worked out for an hour on my lunch hour. And that is like a lot less than normal. But I think giving myself the grace of when I'm not in full training, not letting myself feel guilty at all that I'm not doing the full hours, because especially I'm 30 now, you would be surprised at how much endurance fitness does hold on. So one of the most important things is really to keep up with your weightlifting because sort of like your power can dissipate. Um, and also it's like a really good time to do weight training because you're not exhausted from cardio that you are the rest of the year when you're training full time. Um, so yeah, just finding ways to move your body that's like fun. And I do think running is great for me. You can do it with your friends. I can do it with my people I know that are not rowers, and they can be better than me because they're smaller than me. And then it's like super fun that it's not competitive in the same way that rowing is.
And I'm sure that's probably good. Like, it's both the physical kind of change, but then also the mental change of like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm not attaching myself to, expectation all the time of, optimal water time and what are my splits on the erg. Like
Hmm.
it's kind of a necessary step back. But then it sounds like you and a couple of your teammates channeled it in a different way, doing a half marathon, so you still had that athletic outlet and a target to kind of hit. But I think again, like that's something I'm really interested in because I think any athlete at any level can
Hmm.
kind of learn from that coming off of some kind of long endeavor or long season. So with that, I want to dive into what I'm super curious about. So you already alluded to it, but you're from New York. You grew up right when I was doing a little bit of research, right? Kind of always in the New York area,
Hmm.
but then went to Columbia and walked on to the team there. And that is something that I love talking about because I love athletes who, kind of, again, just personal background. I did the same at St. Joe's, obviously didn't have, a career in rowing kind of coming upon that, or I guess in coaching, right? So it's a little bit
Hmm.
different. But tell me about how'd you get into rowing? How'd you get into like you were right in high school and then going to an Ivy League with okay, maybe the understanding that you're going to be competing on a rowing team there, maybe not. How did that materialize? And did you have an athletic background leading into making that decision to walk onto the team?
The funny thing is that I did not really. I sort of did. Like, I can't lie. I played sports all my life. My parents, it was very important to them that my sister and I stay active in some capacity throughout our entire lives. They really encouraged, like, I grew up swimming, playing soccer, playing basketball, playing tennis, but I wasn't particularly dedicated to any of them. My longest endeavors were I played tennis competitively from eighth grade through senior year of high school, but I was not a superstar. The best I was first doubles. So in New York, yeah, you have the doubles, and then the singles players are better in public schools. And I played basketball from second grade to ninth grade, but then I quit because I wanted to do debate club, and you couldn't do both. So I was not somebody that would be like one of my teammates, Jess. She was a fabulous volleyball player. She thought about being recruited for volleyball. No one was recruiting me for like another sport. That was not a thing that was going to happen. Um, but when I was applying to colleges, my older sister also went to Columbia, and she didn't love it all the time actually because it's quite a difficult school to have a community. Um, it's in the city. We do have like a great campus there, but things pull you all different directions, and there's not the same sort of like university college feel that you get at a lot of colleges that like the city that they're in uh is all about the school. Like I spent a summer in Ann Arbor, and it's like Michigan is that town is like all for the university, and like that's a very cool but extremely different experience. Where like you walk 3 blocks from Columbia and it's the rest of the city. Nobody knows that you're a college student. So my sister recommended that I try rowing, and she actually had a friend that walked on who fell in love with the sport and ended up as captain and just had the best experience. And she was like, she had all these friends that loved her and supported her, and that was her whole community. So honestly, it was mostly being worried about not having friends. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this. I am 6 feet tall. Like that is the right size for this. I'm gonna give it a go. But honestly, when I had started, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I don't know why. I didn't really think of like, oh yeah, this is a D1 school. This is going to be like so tough and time consuming. Um, and so like the summer before I went to college, I rode like 5K a day in the morning with the Masters Club in my area. And I dragged my mom into it, and she was not a rower either, but now she is. And so I would row a double with her like every morning, and we thought we were so great. We were doing like 45 minutes, and then I went to college and you do 2 hour workouts, and it was very different. Um, I really fell in love. Like, the community there is so wonderful, and also just like the sense of accomplishment of being like, wow, I'm done with my workout by 10 a.m. and the rest of the school hasn't even woken up yet. Um, it was just such a cool experience.
And so you took some like in the summer prior. So when did you kind of get the idea that you were gonna walk onto the team and go about that route? Was that like in that summer, kind of going into Columbia? Like did that like what did that look like? And tell me about the experience of rowing. Like were these coach sessions that you did kind of to lead you up to walking onto the team that you did, kind of your strokes before with your mom, which is awesome. That's amazing. What did that look like?
No, it was kind of self-directed. I So I took a gap year actually before college. So I went off and traveled the world. I taught English in a public school in Costa Rica, and then I did a medical internship in some hospitals in Thailand, and then I did construction work at a school in the Philippines, and then ended the year by backpacking through Europe with my best friend from high school. So did not train that entire year. Actually got incredibly unfit, and like, yeah, didn't work out a single day of that entire year. But I did know that I was already going to go to Columbia, so I deferred my acceptance before I took my gap year. And sort of like when I got home in the summer from traveling, I was like, yep, this is what I want to do. I should probably get in shape. And I rode the Rockland Rowing, which is the club in my area, which actually I had a lot of friends that rode there in high school. I rode there for actually 1 month in freshman year before I decided that I didn't want to row in high school because the coach was way too tough and didn't want me to be a vegetarian and didn't want me to do anything else in my life. And I was like, this is not for me. And look at me now. This is all I do. But those sessions were like very self-directed. I think maybe some of the masters gave us like a few pointers, but mostly it was us sort of figuring out. Many apologies to my mother. I definitely yelled at her so much that summer. And I've learned a lot that you have to be very nice and, relaxed in coaching and give people time. But I was not good at coaching yet, so I was maybe a little mean to her that whole summer. Um, but yeah, we sort of just taught ourselves. I would say my freshman coaches would probably tell you I didn't know very much coming in. And so when I walked on, there was about 20 to 30 other women that tried to walk on at Columbia. Most people self-select out because it's an Ivy League. People are not going there for sports for the most part. And so by the end of freshman year, I think there were only maybe 4 of us left, and only 3 of us from my walk-on class made it to the end of 4 years. So in the beginning, they sort of had us on our own, taught us the basics, put us out in some really tough lineups where we didn't know anything. But by the end of freshman fall, we raced at the Ravana Romp at UVA and actually raced in both the Novice 8 and the 3V. And by the end of my freshman year, I was in the 2V. So it was pretty cool, pretty fast.
Wow. And well, before I even get to deep diving into the rowing side of things, real quick, if you don't mind, because that's super interesting with the gap year. Provide some perspective on that. Like, how do you feel like that was a valuable? Like you already knew that you're going to Columbia, but then you'd elected to, travel the world and do all these amazing things. Like, this is probably a first on the podcast to kind of ask about a gap year and that experience. I'm going to take advantage of it. Like, how do you feel like that kind of like, like where do you feel like the value was that, in that decision to do a gap year and how, what was kind of the value behind that or the reasoning behind that, and how do you feel like it kind of helped you as you entered college?
I think it was amazing for a lot of reasons. I think it gave me a lot of perspective on my life and also a lot of confidence and ability to function on my own. I think it's really hard as an 18-year-old to go off to college and manage everything yourself and take these very hard classes and figure out what you want to do in life. So it was pretty fun to be like, okay, well, I have a job and I'm going and working in these places and I'm working on my skills, but it's not sort of, okay, I have to make this grade and do this thing. And it was really wonderful to sort of go explore and just like be responsible for myself in these other countries and figure out who I was on my own. And that was an incredibly lovely experience, I think, to have before college, because then coming in as freshman, I was like, I already know what I want and I've already partied a lot last year. Like, I can be a little more focused because I've had my break. And also I feel really excited to study. I don't think personally, I was very lucky. High school was not that hard for me. I went to a wonderful public school, but it was never that challenging. But I think I was sort of like tired of sitting in a classroom by the time I was a senior. And so it was really lovely to like go out and learn in a totally different way. I had taken Spanish, but then to live in a Spanish speaking country and like use my Spanish every day was an amazing, super educational experience. And also like to learn how to teach, I think was super valuable for then going back and coaching later. And then also even being an athlete myself, like coaching and the ability to communicate well to somebody else is a really, really important skill to have. And so getting to teach in a different language as an 18-year-old to high school students was like an amazing experience for me that I just like had to hit the ground running and like make it work. And I think that was really important for me to do.
And was it a hard decision for you to be like, hey, I'm going to defer, kind of going to Columbia and an Ivy League and getting my life started the traditional route? Was that like a decision that kind of was challenging for you, or were you like, hey, you know what, like college is going to be there when I get back, and I want to make this, because I think that's something that I feel like a lot of people can kind of learn from,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, like again, the traditional route is I graduate high school and I go off to
Mm-hmm.
college, and I'm kind of right back into it. Was that a challenging? Was that something that weighed on you, or that you thought about, and did it have any influence on your decision to to take a year off?
Not really. I think that if I hadn't have applied for school, some of my friends on the gap year hadn't gotten into colleges yet. I think that would have made me really worried. But Columbia honestly was super happy to have me take a gap year. Most universities are because it is not that common in the US. Because they do understand that you're going to come back a year older, a year more of like self control and understanding that they are like, great, we'll give your spot to somebody else. We've already accepted you as a candidate. That's like pretty easy. Obviously it's like a hard thing to do if you're a rowing recruit. Like no coach wants to be like, oh, I'm going to let you go be on your own for a year and figure things out. But actually later in my rowing career, I ended up in New Zealand in 2020 training. And there were a few kids there at the rowing club I was training at that were gap year students from England. And I think that is an amazing experience that like, if I was an athlete in high school, that would have been super cool to be like, oh, I'm going to train in a different country and like live on my own and still get better as an athlete. I think that is like something super fun and valuable. I think it probably complicates the recruiting process, but I also think like that would be so fun. If I went back to being 18 and I knew I was going to row, I don't know, maybe I would have picked a different location that I could have trained somewhere else.
And I feel like it again, like you said, it exposes you to kind of some of the bigger responsibilities of being a college student,
Mm-hmm.
living on your own, how to take care of yourself, and you probably feel less like you're kind of drinking from the fire hose your
Mm-hmm.
first month as a college student. It's you're a little bit more aware of what to expect, and hopefully that helps your transition rather than I'm sure or there's plenty of high school students out or college students out there where freshman years can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really interesting. And with that, so let me bring it back to the rowing side of things, because walk on Columbia, kind of, again, like limited, you know, athletic diversity
Mm-hmm.
in high school, but
But
not anything
no
that you really.
talent, no like standout thing, I would say.
I
Yeah.
was going to go with something you didn't channel into
Yeah.
necessarily. I'm sure, I'm sure you could swing a tennis racket and do some good things there. But with that, how do you feel like that helped you in those first few years as a um, uh, college Division I walk on? Like where do you feel like what things do you think kind of you can draw on as you reflect backwards as a high school student with where again a little bit of other sports and things like that, but how do you feel like that helped you kind of in those first 2 years as a rower at the Division I program, right? Because obviously for someone who lasted out of 22 walk-ons, and only by the end of 3-4 years only a very small segment of them actually making it through, you had to be doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
Anything from that high school experience that you feel like better equipped you as you kind of reflect back on that to be successful as a college athlete?
Yes, I think one of the main things that I did that a lot of people think is hilarious that I did was mock trial, which is a courtroom debate. But my team at my high school was actually quite good. We were state champions my junior year of high school. So it wasn't like I didn't do other like very competitive things. Um, that and I did constitutional law. I was a chamber orchestra cellist. I did theater, and I think all of these things were really good for like self-directed work that nobody said you had to do these clubs and work really hard at them and like sort of make it at that level. But I really enjoyed all those things, and it's sort of the same as people put into athletics. Mock trial, we used to stay at practice after school from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Like that's the same amount of time people put into sports, but we put into legal argument and performance of it. And I think that really helped. Was like I knew how to like work very hard at something, and though it was different, I think then transitioning to rowing, it wasn't that hard to conceptualize. Okay, I'm going to work 4 hours out of my day outside of the classroom on something else and be really dedicated to it. And I think the other thing that helped of being a walk-on, which maybe you feel too, is like it's so exciting when you're 18, 19 to try something new and you get better at it like pretty quickly because you're bad in the beginning. And so that is really fun. It's like every single test piece or performance, I got better than the time before. So it really like spurs you on because you're like, wow, I PR'd again. Okay, I can get a little faster. It doesn't matter that like my first 30-minute test I ever did was a 2:17, but then it was a 2:11, and then a 2:07, and then a 2:05, and then a 2:02. But like you very clearly can like see the gains. So I think that is like a very exciting thing to do when you like walk on. You're sort of like later on in the process.
And that's like one of the, I mean, obviously doing, mock trial and those things like that probably, and obviously the long list of extracurriculars that you took on as a high school student, again, it probably made like trying something new as a rower, like, okay, like, yeah, it's a physical challenge. It's a little bit different, but I'm used to new challenges and barking down and working hard. And now I'm just applying that in a different, modality. And you highlighted one of the things that I love. Like, again, like I think there's things that high school athletes, whether you rode in high school or you are someone who's, late in your high school career and wants to go off and do it in college. But like like you said, like that excitement where it's like, oh, like this is something new and I'm seeing progress and things like that. I think that's something that I always highlight with people who kind of start things later. And okay, like it's just every day is something new and fresh and I've never been here before, so it's all brand new. So again, that's why I always think like, I love asking those questions. Like, what do you feel like in high school kind of helped prepare you for that? And then obviously when you are there, there's this new level of excitement, and you start to see that progress. And when did you, as a, in college, because you, if I'm not mistaken, right, you graduated 2018?
Yes.
From Columbia, and then obviously, Olympics 2020, 2021, obviously, right? So kind of, 1 year pushed back. But in your time at Columbia, or prior or after, when did you feel like that was a path, the Olympic path was actually something that was realistic as someone who, never rode competitively prior to being a college student? When did you start to feel like, oh, like I could actually take this to, the Olympics and only a few years out of college? When did that start to materialize?
Well, I think one of the most important things for me, which is something that I'd recommend to all college rowers, is start watching the national team. Obviously, I was very fortunate that Rio happened right in the middle of my college experience, but I did summer rowing that summer, and I remember sitting in the dorms, like before racing for Canadian Henley, and watching the women's 8 win in Rio, and I was like, I want to do that. And I was so far away from being there, but like seeing them and like getting to watch the national team after that year and sort of being aware that it existed, I was like, oh, this is something that I want. By the time I was a junior in college, I was physically the fastest person on the team. I wouldn't say I was the best. I had so much to learn, but I had the fastest 2K and 6K. And so I applied for U23 camp for the summer after my junior year. I knew beforehand that I was going to be cut. I don't think the coaches there knew that, but I was like, I know that Columbia is not that good a team, that I'm not that good. I want to go see what actual good college rowers are like. And that was such a formative experience to be like, okay, I'm not that far away. Like, I'm not as good as them yet. I was cut. But I was like, I can envision myself there. Hilariously, Brett Gorman, who's one of the coaches there, and now she's the director of pathways for US rowing, she asked me last year, she was like, Charlotte, what made you continue after getting cut from U23s? Because I'm going to be honest, you were bad and I didn't think you were going to make it. And I was like, I did though. And I think you need that sort of like inner fire that you're like, okay, I'm not good enough yet. That is fine. I can like totally accept that. But I also see it for myself. So I think going into senior year, I was like, okay, I'm going to work my hardest to graduate and try to get invited to the training center. I did not get invited to the training center, which was honestly okay in retrospect. I was pretty upset about it that I couldn't get invited. But I ended up training at New York Athletic Club, and I went from being in all these team boats at Columbia to being in a single and being incredibly bad and incredibly slow and basically relearning everything from step one because a single is quite difficult. But I kind of just knew that I could be good enough, which is a kind of crazy thing because it could have not ended up here. I could have just never made it. But I just knew that it was something I wanted to do, and I knew that you can only do things when you're young. You can never go back to it. So, like, what is the harm of spending your 20s trying something totally crazy because I can have a career later? So I kept training as a single and I didn't get invited. And I went to winter speed order and I went to like doubles trials in 2019 and did terribly. I think I was second to last, but I kept just being like, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work harder. I will get there. Um, And yeah, like I said, I was lucky I got to race in New Zealand at the beginning of 2020 with the intention of coming to singles trials for Tokyo. And hopefully, really my goal was to get invited to quad camp maybe. And then as everybody knows, the world shut down. Um, but in a twist of fate, that ended up being the best thing for me because I did an online erg competition and two people from the training center, Kendall Chase and Kara Kohler, also did it. And I beat both of them. And so literally after I beat Kendall in like the second to last round to get to the final, the coaches emailed my coach and were like, you can come to the training center. Like that was the real moment where I was like, okay, this is possible. Now I'm going to go to the training center. And like, I'm still probably not going to make it for Tokyo because it's my first year at the training center. But like, I'm just going to try my hardest every day. And it worked, which was a little crazy.
That's awesome. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a very unique story because and my follow-up to that is, so 2017, 2018, you're still in college, but you try out for U23s, doesn't work out, you get cut, right? You kind of said you knew it going in, but the exposure to all that, and then this constant, it sounds like, okay, well, post, kind of COVID, like COVID's already happened, and now you're finally, that sounds like that's when things started to kind of come about where it's like, oh, I could potentially, make a team and do all this stuff. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But what was the internal driver of that 2.5, 3 year period that kept you motivated to keep going? Like, was it, hey, I'm one of the faster ergs and I can show that on these indoor like, was it just blind, hey, I'm just going to kind of, I don't know any better, and I'm just going to kind of keep pushing forward, and everything's going to be, every obstacle's going to be thrown at me, but whatever? Like, was there an internal motivator that kind of kept you pushing forward in that period of getting cut a few times and not making certain teams and being invited to certain camps? Like, what drove that?
I think it was that like inner fire that I knew that I could do it. It was just going to take time. It was generally good to be graduating in 2018. I was like, okay, look, they might not accept me into the training pool until after Tokyo. So I was sort of like, I have 2 years to simply get better and put myself in a position that then for the Paris cycle, I will be in contention. So I think it was good because although I was pushing myself a lot, it sort of was with the understanding, okay, this is going to be a very long-term goal, which I think is very important because you want to make progress all the time. That can be too much pressure on yourself because that was sort of at the time where like I wasn't PRing on everything anymore. I graduated with a 6:45 for my 2K, and then it was like it took a lot of work to break further than that. but I think it was a good, like, give myself the time, get better at the technical aspect. I think the other thing that was very important was I was incredibly honest with myself, which was the power has always been the easiest aspect for me. The training and fitness is the easy part for me. The hard part is the technique. And I was like, okay, I'm going to spend 2 years getting to be a better rower, to have better boat feel, to know what I'm doing mechanically better. And that really paid off because when I got invited to the training center, we were all in singles. And this is one of my favorite quotes that Tom ever said to me. He told me, I thought that you would be bad because he didn't know that I was like going to be okay in a single. And I actually did really well in the single when I first got invited to the training center. And that set me up incredibly well in the coach's eyes once we got to selection.
And what and again, I think that's what I love there is adjust, like, so you kind of went in with the long game in mind anyway, where it's like, hey, it's 2018 and the Olympics is until 2021 now, and kind of readjusting your timeline, which I think you highlighted a great point of like, okay, well, you have to kind of adjust your expectations and you can't expect a PR on every piece and this and that. So I think there's a lot of value in there for athletes who, again, like, we're in a culture of, hey, I have to improve, I have to develop, I have to every single time I have to get the new PR or do this and that. So I think that's really valuable, where it's like, hey, there is a long-term game with that. And I guess another question on that front, because we'll dive into some other topics here in a second, but was it you graduated from Columbia, right? Great Ivy League school, right? And you have this high school experience and of mock trials and things like that, and I'm sure there's a part of you that maybe was weighing, hey, like, kind of same thing about the gap year and making that decision. Was there a part of you at the end of, again, this is maybe a change in direction to a degree, but was there a part of you at the end of graduating from high school or college, sorry, where it's like, okay, like, is the Olympics really kind of the path that I want to go down? Or is it, hey, I want to go down, or I want to take this Columbia degree and, go be whatever and whatever you're studying and go to a professional route, whatever that may be. What, a little bit of a flip in direction, but what was that decision like for you? And how did you kind of weigh that?
Initially, it wasn't tough because I was like, okay, this is something I want to do. This is something I love. This is something I can only do once in my life during this period. But I think, like any time in training, when stuff gets tough, you start questioning what you're doing. And so I think when I had periods where I was like, I am so slow, the men that I'm training with are beating me every day by so much, like, this is so tough. All of my friends are, yeah, I had friends going like immediately consulting in business, like really earning a lot of money with their potential. I was like, I'm broke. I coach juniors and make no money. I'm living with my parents because I can't afford rent. I was like, what am I doing with my life? But then you have those like beautiful days you're on the water and you're like, this is amazing and I feel so great and I am getting better, and you like get into the flow state and like that's way better than being in an office. But it was tough because I was pre-med. I did bio research in college and I thought that I would go to medical school. And so during that period I also took my MCATs and I sort of thought that, okay, I'll train for a few years and then I'll become a doctor. Well, that has sort of gone out the window, which is okay. Like, I think that's another thing actually with the gap year is like, when you are young, I think we've been taught, like, you have to know what you're doing with your life. No, you don't. Like, there is so much ahead of you, and there's so many decisions you make that could take you on different paths. And I think it's really important to open all those doors and not be like, okay, I was 18 and somebody told me I had to do this thing and that's what I'm going to do with the rest of your life. Because it really limits you to like what you could fall in love with. Like, if you went back and asked 18-year-old me, oh my God, I wouldn't know that this is what I was going to do when I was 30 and like be in love with it and be training full time and, yeah, living a nomadic lifestyle across the country. I would have been like, that's crazy. And if you told me I was going to be a 2-time Olympian trying to go for my third, I would have been like, you're insane. That's never going to happen. So I think like you have to take those leaps of faith. And I am very, very fortunate that my parents saw something in me that they were like, okay, we're not going to pressure you into having to, use your degree right away. They do still really want me to have a career after rowing, which I want as well. But They were so lovely and um, obviously able to financially support me and allow me to live at home, which is something that like a lot of people stop rowing because you don't have that sort of financial security or resources around you that like I could stay on my parents' insurance, that they could pay for my food, and be okay with me making 20 grand a year coaching and, you know, just training every day. So I do think it was hard at points, but yeah, I was very lucky that I sort of like could hold on to that inner fire, and keep going for my goal.
And then how do you kind of like, so now here we are, I guess you have, you're going, again, you're starting the path to make the third, right? To kind of, again, 2028, right? You're on that path. Like, is it something where it's like, hey, like I've kind of, this is getting easier? Again, not in terms of the training, because
Mhm.
rowing is, I make
It
this joke
never
all the
gets
time. The better,
easier. Yeah.
the better you get at rowing, the harder it becomes, right?
Hmm.
So, but is that something where it's like, okay, like you're entering this kind of third, the you're going at it for round three, right? And you're kind of starting here. Like, is that something where the routine and the commitment to that lifestyle and the inner drive kind of keeps you coming back for another one? Is that something that you have to weigh on occasion? And like, hey, it's like, hey, like there are some days where we have a terrible row out there, and I'm like, oh man, I'm doing this again. Like I could totally be a doctor right now or working here. Like, is that a wrestling match that, again, everything is going to be like those more acute things that you kind of
Hmm.
have like, hey, like it's the bad day, not the bad,
Hmm.
kind of like 3 months where you're like, oh, I don't want to row anymore. Like, but is that something where it's like you kind of question that, or you're like, oh man, like I'm, here we are round three, or is it something where it's like, hey, like 4 years, I'm gonna, 2028, here we go, like, and this is now starting to get a little bit easier with this lifestyle and being, the nomadic lifestyle that you're talking about. A little bit of a broad question, but is that something that you feel like you've acclimated yourself to, and it's like, oh, like this is awesome, rock on.
Yes and no. There are parts that are amazing. Like I feel so lucky to get to be with my teammates every day. They are like some of my favorite people in the world. But also it is like incredibly tough to spend many months out of the year out of a suitcase and having to give up seeing my friends that are not rowers, and my personal life often like goes out the window because I have to be in bed at 8 p.m. and I can't do other things. So I think that part is tough. It doesn't make me love it any less, but I think looking at my this is actually like my first complete cycle. Like because Tokyo was strange, I only really had 2 years for it. The Paris cycle was shortened, so that was like very different. So I think it has allowed me to be more relaxed in some ways of being like, it is the first year of the quadrennial. This is a 4 year process. The things that I am focused on this year are very different than the things that I've been focused on in the past. It's about setting myself up the best possible for 4 years from now and taking this year to go back to the fundamentals and not be so concerned with like, okay, I have to be winning every day because that will come back from like, I just want to crush people all the time. Because that part of yourself like never goes away. But it's about thinking about all the other things that I could slightly change and alter to have a different outcome in LA. It's funny, one of my teammates and I were talking about it the other day, and we were saying, I think we hate losing more than we like winning. So I think we've all been really evaluating what are the things that we can do over the next 4 years that will get us on the podium and not have that feeling of losing in some respects. So I think my coaches don't like me some days recently when I'm pushing back a lot because I'm like, I want to know everything right now. I want to know why we're doing things. I want to know the reasoning. I want to know what I should change personally. I want you to push me as hard as you can because maybe it is because I have a deadline. I'm like, I'm not going to Brisbane. I'm not doing 8 more years. I'm doing 4 more years and then I'm retiring, and that is it. So I am going to put everything I can into these 4 years and push as hard as I can.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the perspective and kind of the long term. Like I think that's a something I'm hearing a lot in terms of like thinking long term and like having
Mm-hmm.
a plan and things like that. And as we kind of change direction a little bit, what and talk a little bit more about Charlotte the rower a little bit. Like one of the things I love asking you know people who compete at the highest level within their field. Obviously, this is right? Rowing's the field that we're talking about. But what do you feel like makes like, I guess I ask it every different every time, but like what would you say is like your, as an athlete, like your superpower? And what I mean by that is like, what is the thing like for you as a rower at, the highest level, two-time Olympian, going for, kind of starting the process to make a third. What do you feel like is the thing that your core as an athlete has kind of helped guide that trajectory or that skill set that you rely on? And it could be as simple as, hey, you know what, I'm just I'm just ultra competitive and I, win every seat race and this and that, and that's why I'm in these boats. Or it could be, I take care of my body, recovery, I get enough sleep, I do this or that. Like there's that one thing that you own that you feel like when you're talking about separating the top of the top, you feel like that is something that you've really taken ownership of and has been a key driver in your success today.
I think my personal rowing superpower is my grit and my toughness. It's funny because I actually wouldn't have necessarily said that that was what I was best at until I've started watching other people compete. I, when I went to Tokyo, I thought, oh my God, this is my first national team. I thought I was going to be so nervous. I thought I was going to go to the line and be like, I'm going to throw up. I'm so nervous. I'm competing at the Olympics. I actually wasn't that nervous. This is not to say I wasn't nervous at all, because I definitely was nervous. But I think my ability to compete under pressure is one of my most important aspects. Even just racing the single at speed order, I realized like during those races, I was like, okay, I might not actually even win all these races, but like no one is going to break me. I will never break during a race. And I think that that is like a super key aspect to have. And definitely was like highlighted in my best race performances have just been like, you are going to out tough other people. And like you can do that. You can make yourself like work harder during races and then also during practices. Like we do a lot of side by side. And look, we're supposed to do heart rate training. Sometimes you let the heart rate go out the door because you gotta win. And I think that like toughness and grit and need to prove yourself all the time is like an incredibly valuable skill. I think it actually also probably comes from coming from Colombia. One of my coaches, Sam, once told me, like when I told her I wanted to try to make the national team, she was like, they're never going to make it easy. You are going to have to prove and overprove that you can do it. Like you're going to have a chip on your shoulder and that is fine. Keep that chip on your shoulder. It will make you better.
That's all. And do you? Here's a follow up question I was going to ask you anyway, but it kind of speaks to some of what you talked about. But do you feel like that had influence? Like you were stroke seat this past
Mm-hmm.
Olympic cycle, and rowing is a sport where like in an eight, like there's one seat that kind of stands out above. And again, it's not in terms of like, hey, like this is the best, the star of the team kind of thing, but there's something different that kind of puts you in that seat relative to, or your skill set's a little bit different than
Mm-hmm.
maybe, the people sitting in the middle or the person in the bow. Like, do you feel like, again, this is an opportunity for, for you and however way you kind of want to go about it. But like, do you feel like part of that being in that position and being the stroke seat of literally, the elite of the elite boat, do you think that's contributed to that grittiness and that competitiveness? And or do you think it's more like, what do you feel like was one of the, when you think about seats that people highlight, right? The stroke seat is obviously one that sets the rhythm, right? The flow and everything that goes through, is determined by, the person setting the pace. What do you feel like, again, a little bit broader, but what do you feel like kind of led to, or as kind of put you in that position, right? Is it rowing the single all the time and your technique? Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, because it is a unique opportunity. And while we have you, I think it's good for young listeners who are, oh, I'm stroke seat again. This is cool. Like, maybe it's because I do this or that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, shed some light on that. Again, your personal kind of thing, but any kind of takeaways that you have for being in that position.
Mm-hmm. I think you would obviously have to ask Jesse the ultimate question of like why he picked me. But I think part of it is like I've spent a lot of time in stroke seats earlier in my career, and I think when I was younger, it was probably because a lot of times in like a smaller boat, you can put a stronger person there who is technically a little less good. and then they can kind of just go and the bow seat can follow them. But I think as I went on, it was because I was consistent. And I think that's like one of the biggest skills you can work on if you're a stroke seat in a boat is like people are relying on you. You cannot go rogue ever. And I think that like Jesse would say that he would trust me to do exactly what he is telling us to do and be able to do it again and again and again and again. I think that that is sort of like a key skill is like, yeah, you're not better than the other people in your boat. You're not really different, but you need to be so consistent and unflappable. And I think that is like a super important thing about that seat is like, you need to have a clear like identity of what your stroke is. That doesn't mean you're never going to compromise. Like you have to compromise in practice with your boat and like talk about what works and you need to change to fit what works for them. But then in a race, you are going to do what you're going to do and everyone else is going to follow you and you have to like have sort of, I think also, yeah, that belief in yourself that what you're doing is correct. And I think that is really important for racing because you can't like let self-doubt ever creep in.
And that's I actually love that you said like because I was searching for a word to kind of better describe it, like unwavered, right? Like or
Mm-hmm.
unflappable, right? Like and what you describing your your superpower being grittiness, resiliency, and just hey, like I'm gonna always be there no matter how bad I'm performing. Like I'm gonna stay in this race at any means necessary, and like those are kind of the key things in many ways of being someone who is literally leading the rhythm. Like you can't stray away from the plan, right? Because you got people following you. You gotta be that unflappable, immovable person that kind of sticks to your game plan. No, I love that, and I think that was a question because again, like it is a unique position to be in, with that responsibility of maintaining that rhythm and all those things. But with that, shifting gears a little bit, so I want to ask you, so for you personally, right? Like kind of, and again, this is something that we can talk about in terms of like, hey, like for you as an athlete and kind of, what made you successful, but like, what are some things that you've kind of really kind of that you feel like as a rower at this caliber, you know, like what are some things in your training and your evolution as an athlete that you feel like has, are almost like non-negotiables in training or performing, like versus say what you did maybe in college at Columbia, right? Like, are there things that you feel, and again, question that I think there's you and then there's how it kind of relates to, or how other athletes or other coaches listening, right? Things that you feel like they can implement as well. But like, are there kind of non-negotiables in your training or in your development as a person that you feel like has really set you up for success, kind of as an elite rower, right? As an elite athlete, right? Like, hey, we really rely on training, mobility, or strength training, this and that. Talk about that a little bit, right? What are the qualities that really set you up for success?
I think there are a wide range of them because you kind of have to optimize everything in your life. But I think always my advice to particularly college kids is sleep. Like that is one of the biggest things that like personally myself as a college student, I definitely could have been better. I It is funny, I only pulled one all-nighter of college and that was to take one of my friends to the ER one night, but we did not have the best sleeping habits in general. So I think that is something that like as you get older and you do more volume and you have the luxury of not studying anymore, that is so important. So I really feel like college students, like I know that they have so much weighing upon them, but as much as you can do with recovery, that is going to make you a more successful athlete that you can get up the next day and perform better on your workout. Definitely in tandem with that is your nutrition. I was definitely told different things at different points in my career. I'm a vegetarian, and I've had a lot of coaches push back on me about being a vegetarian, but I decided to not eat meat starting when I was in fourth grade, so I was not going back. Um, and I think the most important thing, though, is that you eat enough. And I think that can be really tough, especially like women are messaged a lot of different ways. One of my college coaches had the big girls on the team go on a diet for a year, and I think that's like one of my biggest regrets. All of that year, I would like take naps in the middle of the day and be exhausted all the time. And it definitely was because I was under fueling. I was very lucky. I was still getting better, I think because I was a walk on, but I think that really hindered people getting better. You have to eat enough. Our sport is very hard. It's very intensive. Like you need to be consuming enough calories all the time. One of my other big key things though, I think is the time in the single. I think as much as you can teach yourself self-reliance in this sport, it will make you more successful. I know it's a team sport. We have to do it together at the end of the day, but I think the most you can take accountability that like what you do in the boat matters, that you still have to like go back in team boats and be like, it could be me. I could be the one messing up. Like I need to get better. And even at my net level and like being a two-time Olympian, I can be the worst one in the boat sometimes and never like be above your teammates. Like you can always improve. Like I have friends that are gold medalists and they can still improve and they will admit themselves. So I think like always trying to make yourself a little better and being in the single is so good for that because you have a great day, that's all on you. You have a bad day, that's also all on you. And I also think it gives you a lot of time by yourself. Like coaches are so wonderful. I've had really fabulous coaches in my life, but they also always have had to coach big squads of athletes. There is a lot of time you're not going to get that much coaching. You have to figure out how to coach yourself and make yourself better because it's not always going to be somebody else that's going to be like, hey, Charlotte, you're a little too hard on the plate with the catch. Like you have to learn to feel that and not be told by somebody else that you're doing something wrong to make yourself better.
And I love that again, like, you know, being in the single. And I think one of the things that's super interesting is like, and again, this could be a whole nother podcast, but like, you know, I'm sure there are people listening, and whether it's a parent or a high school athlete who have, you know, who maybe, you know, there are vegetarian athletes out there, and like things that you like just kind of see in someone like you know, you can be successful doing that, right? Like, you know, kind of going down that route. Like that could be a whole nother conversation. But I think that's really interesting because you don't hear that all the time necessarily. And again, I'm sure there are plenty of vegetarian elite athletes out there, right? But like the fact that, you know, you're as you highlight that, like for people listening, it's like, oh, like, you know, there isn't one way to do things, right? And you can still be successful at the highest level. And tell me a little bit about like, okay, like as we a few more kind of questions as we go here, but talk about like just training as a whole, right? Handling the volume of, you kind of highlighted, right? Like 25 hours a week, right? You kind of threw that in there, right? Like, which sound like if that's a normal kind of fully in the week, like, and you know, how do you like kind of like manage a lot of that volume and that intensity, and maybe some of that's on the water, or most of that's on the water, obviously, right? But some of it might be on the erg, some of it might be strength training. Like, how do you kind of manage that competitive workload, you know, and able to sustain that for, right, you know, now kind of what you're going to be doing for another 4 years now, right? Like, how do you kind of like, what are some things that you think about, or tricks and things that you really focus on outside of sleep, which I think every person that comes on here, like that's the one that everyone kind of has the same story of, hey, I didn't focus on it in college, and now it's actually, you know, I realize that it is a superpower in its own right. But other than kind of the sleep side of things, like how do you kind of manage that high volume, high intensity workload?
I think it's something that we're like always working on because there are weeks, like a few weeks ago, I felt like the volume was crushing me. And so it just means you have to be better at everything else. I think starting off, my advice to like younger athletes is like anytime you ramp up, you just need to be like a little more careful, and build that load slowly. You can't go from being like out of season and not really training to doing full weeks and full intensity. Like that is how you get hurt. And so just like making sure to like ease yourself in and also like ease yourself out on the other end. One of the biggest things is that we have access to physical therapists on the national team, and I think that has been such a big boon to me. Like I didn't have one when I was training on my own after college, but big shout out to Katie. She is amazing. She keeps us healthy. Like any little niggles or things start feeling off, like we have access to resources. Um, and they would always say, like, the younger you are and the more you start doing physical therapy exercises, the better it's going to be. So, like, definitely, if I could tell my college self, I'd be like, do more core work. It's so boring, but like, do that. Do your little band pull parts. Do your like glute activations. Those things really matter. That your body is like ready to go for practices, and then also stretching and recovering after them. Like that is so important. And like, if you start letting those things slip, because like the volume is tiring, and you just, I mean, I get home and I'm like, I just want to sit on a couch and do nothing. Like, that is not good for me. I have to go and do my stretches and sit in pigeon and do yoga on the weekends, because like those are the things that are really going to pay off and keep me healthy. I have gone through different injuries. I cracked my rib in fall of 2018, probably from overtraining and basically like ramping up too quickly in the single. I had two back spasms in the spring of 2021, and that was definitely from just like pushing myself too hard all the time. But besides that, knock on wood, I've been like pretty much fine and healthy. I think that the like thing that has helped me stay healthy, besides physical therapy and sort of like, managing all those other aspects, is knowing when to put my foot on the gas and knowing when to pull back a little. So it's like, okay, I'm erging and I'm doing steady state. Some days I'm at a 202, some days I'm at a 212. And it is just like looking at your training load, and heart rate is super important for that. Of like, I know what my zone is. Some days steady state is the easiest thing ever, and my body feels fine. And some days your body tells you you're tired, you should go a little slower, you should cross train a little more. And I think just being really in tune with that, of like, more is not always better, and faster is not always better. And so you have to listen to what is happening in your body. If you're doing a lot of volume, not everything can be intensity and the hardest thing ever. You have to know when to turn it off and turn it on.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable. Like just again, like you highlighted, like the core and the mobility and things like that, taking ownership of that on your own. And I think for any high school, college athlete out there, right, like masters athletes even, right, like that's a huge thing, right? Like, can you stay consistent with some of those things? Because that's a long-term investment for yourself. And then, managing the intensity of things where, like you said, right, like trusting your body a little bit more. I think most people, or a lot of people, kind of get in the mindset of, if it's not perfect, I'm not going to do it. Or if it's, I'm going to kind of keep loading and keep hammering, through the brick wall, not knowing that I can just kind of take a step back and actually see I can walk around it or something like that. Like there's always a different path. I think those are valuable things. And kind of last question before we start to wrap things up, but I want to dive into, I just want to kind of ask you, because I think, again, like I love hearing your thought process behind, the training, and then also I want to, or the, just your perspective on these different things, but I want to bring it to college. And okay, like you're someone who, it sounds, and actually high school as well, because you said you were successful, or you managed high school pretty well, even though you had, what looked like a grocery list probably of extracurriculars that you were embarking on, which is awesome. Like, and I talk to high school kids all the time, and like the things that they have on their plate is unreal, right? Like I wasn't one of those people, right? I was a sports guy, right? Like, yeah, they got practice after school, that's cool. But like mock trial and all these different things, right? Like, playing some sports and all these different things, like, and then, going off to college at an Ivy League, and then throwing a Division I workload onto your plate as well. What are your tips for managing the balance of academics and athletics at a college or even a high school, right? Like, and, trying to be successful in both, and avoiding burnout, and, getting enough sleep and things like that. Like, what are some of the things that worked for you in managing, top, elite rowing, but also, trying to be a student and thrive at, a challenging institution like Columbia, and all that. So what would be your tips on that front?
I'm not gonna lie, I was not always perfect. I think it is a really, really challenging thing, and I think it's kind of crazy to like think about how many people across the country do this. There being, we got IRAs and NCAAs soon, and you all have finals. Like that is a very challenging thing to do and like manage everything. I think the thing that has helped me and still helps me now that I have like a day job and I go to practice is sort of like partitioning my time. Is like when I'm thinking about work, I really try not to think about rowing. And when I'm thinking about rowing, I really try not to think about my work deadlines, because when those two things start bleeding into each other, they make each other worse. Like I'm going to be a worse employee if I'm thinking about rowing, and I'm going to be a worse rower if I'm thinking about what next thing needs to be sent off for work. So I think giving yourself the space to keep parts of your life separate is really good, because it is very challenging. And I think just making sure, it does go back to the sleep thing. Like in college, that was super big for me, was like, I figured out when was the best time to study, that I wasn't exhausted from training, and just whatever works for you. So I was like, not somebody who stayed late in the library, but I do remember getting up a few days at 4 a.m. to study for my biochem midterms before I went to practice. Um, so you just kind of like make it work, whatever works for you personally. Um, so I think that's like super big, and it's sort of dialing in all those other things in your life that are going to make it easier. Like if it's cooking food ahead or being like, okay, I have to get takeout or whatever else can help you manage that load. Like that is really important to like give yourself grace in those other spaces. Um, but yeah, it's a challenge. It's still a challenge that I'm exploring myself. I think that it's like still hard to manage my like personal life and the choices and like other things I want to do and train and work a job.
I even, it's funny, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh wait, like you're doing it now,
Hmm.
even, right? Like you were doing it in high school and then obviously in college, like with academics and sports, but now you're doing it as, professional and, like elite rower who's trying to make an Olympics, right? So you're doing it now in that time management. I love what you said. I think this is absolute gold for anyone, but it's like when you're there, be there, present,
Hmm.
right? Like, and don't let the all the other weight of deadlines and assignments and things like that weigh on your rowing, because now you're going to be a bad or worse rower. And then vice versa, don't be thinking about the race this weekend when you're trying to focus on school, right, or focus on work, right? So I think that's incredible advice. Charlotte, last thing before we kind of wrap things up here, but any general advice for any athlete who can take away one or two things from your path, right? We've there's, if we run it back throughout the entire conversation, there's millions of things in there that people can kind of take away that will help them in this conversation. But if there's like one thing that you kind of, again, like a piece of advice for a younger athlete, whether they are in college or in high school or in another sport entirely, what would that be, right? That, kind of like something that you can take away from your experience and that you've learned that, hey, could be helpful for anyone as they embark in whatever path that they are pursuing, whether that's related to rowing or not. But, we can always tie it back to rowing somehow. But what would that be?
I think my number one advice for people who want to continue on to be an elite athlete specifically is you have to love it. Like you have to love all of the aspects of it. And that doesn't mean that every day is gonna be great and you're gonna be having the best day of your life, but I think you have to love sort of like the training and the actual like nitty gritty of the sport. You can't just love the racing, you can't just love the feeling of winning because like those things don't happen that frequently. So that is like always what I tell people. Are you thinking about going to row in college? Do you love it? Do you love it enough to spend 20 hours a week in college doing this sport? If you don't love it, there are other choices. Like let yourself do what you want to do with your life. Um, my other advice, just in general for sports, and I think like a thing that is really important as an athlete, it kind of goes back to like the stroke seat conversation, is be a good teammate. Like sometimes that is more important than being the strongest person on the team or the best person on the team, is getting the most out of your teammates. Like that makes the fastest boats. It's not always the best ergs, it's not always the best technique, but can you and your boatmates figure out what works together for you all, then you will be successful. And that is about compromise, and it is really about communication. Like, can you talk honestly with your teammates about what you need to work on and hold each other accountable? Um, and be a little vulnerable. I think sports are really scary because it is a platform where you can fail in front of other people. And that is a challenging thing for anybody to do, but being okay with some days you're going to fail because you're pushing yourself so hard.
I love that. I love that. That is all three of those are just great things for anyone out there, right? Anyone listening, and especially the younger athletes out there who are, regardless of what they're pursuing. No, Charlotte, this was an absolute blast. I want to be conscious of your time because you have selection literally sounds like tomorrow,
Alright,
right?
yeah.
Coming
Yeah.
off of practice this morning. So I want to make sure that you are fully prepped, and you can't blame the At 2000 podcast for, just kidding. But no, I want to make sure that we're conscious of your time. This was, again, I really enjoyed a lot of things that you brought in this conversation. I know a lot of people are going to take away. I know we went some alternative paths. We're talking about the gap years and stuff like that. Again, I think there's some awesome things in there
Mhm.
that, I can't take away as someone else as well in my 30s who doesn't need to, think about that necessarily step in my life, but other people who are listening or parents who are listening and things like that, coaches who are listening, incredible stuff in there that anyone can take away from. So with that, thank you so much for coming on. I think we will maybe, as we get closer, it's a long timeline, but as we get closer to, kind of the next phase and kind of pursuing LA 2028 and all that fun stuff, maybe getting you on again where we can kind of talk about this cycle, even though,
Hmm.
after talking about the last two. So we'll maybe do a round two at a later date. But no, Charlotte, this was a blast. You're a rock star. I really enjoyed this conversation, and good luck tomorrow. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun too.